Good morning.
Morning. Morning.
And thanks again for making me feel so welcome. It's always a pleasure to be here, a privilege to be here as well. And I think especially today because I got to get baby cuddles and especially getting them in without Naomi here. Because she always hogs all the cuddles and I don't get a look in. So, and as you may have heard, there was a slight mix-up over the dates. I almost turned up last week by mistake. And when we realised the mix-up, my main disappointment was I was going to have to wait for an extra week to have a cuddle. Because we've got a God who blesses us in sort of more ways than we can count, really, but there's nothing quite like the arrival of a new baby. It's impossible not to feel the blessings sort of in moments like this. And I'm sure there are times when we do forget how blessed we are, but no, it's a real privilege to come this morning and join with you. And this morning I want to talk about generosity. And what it means to be generous. I guess what it means to be a generous Christian. And there's been a couple of contrasting sort of thoughts that have led me to thinking about generosity. I'll get to those in a little bit. One thing, perhaps to reassure you, I'm not going to be talking about financial generosity. It's not going to be about money and how you should kind of come and give me all your money or anything like that. I guess I'm more thinking about generosity of heart, generosity of spirit, kind of that sort of thing. I mean, if you just look around the church this morning, for example, it takes the involvement of many people for things to work. Sometimes it's easy to focus on the people who come and stand at the front, but they wouldn't be any good without the support from elsewhere. The music and the IT and Sunday school upstairs with the kids and. But it's more even than just that. We've got those who are arranging the chairs, making cups of tea. Maybe you gave someone a lift here this morning. Services like this morning don't happen without all these people putting the time and effort to do these things. And I'm sure there's things I'm forgetting as well. And that's just this morning. There's all the other activities that go on in the church through the week. My memory's not great. We have Busy Bees, Bible study, we have coffee morning mentioned, food bank. There's all sorts going on. And it's not even just those things. What about the cleaning and maintenance and, the planning and all that kind of thing? It takes time and effort of lots of people for things to work. And I guess that's sort of, in a way, the first kind of trigger that led me to think about generosity. As you've already been mentioned, there's camp next week, and most of you are probably familiar with camp. Doesn't quite feel like it's less than a week away, but it is. But with that work, it's the generosity of many people that enables it to function. There was a number of us there yesterday putting up big tents and marquees and all this thing in the torrential pouring rain. I still feel like I haven't quite dried out yet. But in camp couldn't exist, couldn't happen without the generosity of the people turning up, not just on the week of camp itself, although that absolutely too, but also through the year. And don't get me wrong, money is a factor in that. Camp wouldn't be able to happen if there wasn't for financial contributions, but definitely I think a bigger factor is all the unpaid hours of time and effort and skill and experience that people put in through the year. And it struck me that it would be a great thing to be known as a generous church. And I'm not saying you're not a generous church. I was kind of thinking, say if someone comes into your church once and they go away and then someone asks them, you went to that church, did you? What's it like? Wouldn't it be a nice thing if one of the words that springs to mind for someone who's visited is that it was a generous church? Because I think often that's the opposite impression that people have about churches. They see it all more as a kind of a take from the church. Their dealings with the church often come at a cost because they're there for weddings or christenings or funerals, and often there's charges to do that. And sometimes lots of money. And then even once inside, if they get people inside, there's a focus on the collection plate constantly. Now, my youngest two, they go to a Church of England school. mainly because it's the nearest one. It wasn't any kind of deliberate choice to go to a faith school, but as a result of that, a lot of the school activities take place in the local church. So things like nativity services, Easter services, end of year services, kind of things like that. And there's always a little element of it when we're there that kind of makes you feel slightly uncomfortable. Because you get to the point, and you imagine you've got this church and it's packed out, and probably that's as busy as the church ever gets. And it's full of lots of people who probably aren't regular church goers. And at the end of these services, they always hand over to the local vicar to close with a short thought, prayer, whatever. Just like a couple of minutes. And he always takes the time to say to people, and point out where the collection bowls are, and now they're very proud of the new contactless donation point, and goes on about that. And then he'll do a quick Lord's Prayer and out. And don't get me wrong, churches need money. It's not wrong for them to ask for donations, but when it's the only perhaps 2 minutes of time you've got of these people, and you spend 90% of it focusing on give us your money, it just gives the impression of a church that's it's all take, rather than focusing on what the church has got to give. And especially when many of these churches, you'll see the vicar get in a big car and drive to his big vicarage afterwards. I was reading an article and I couldn't find it. It was a few months ago, but from my memory, they've basically done a survey of a lot of people, and they're asking them questions like, what's your job, how much do you earn, what kind of house do you live in, how many kids have you got? And then they're also asking questions like, how happy are you, how satisfied are you, and all this. One of the questions was about their faith. Are you a Christian or not? And when they kind of summarise the results, and this I'm sure won't come as a surprise to many, that they realised that from a financial perspective, there was no difference, statistically, if you like, between the group that identified as Christians and those that identified not as Christians. But when they looked deeper into the other things, that they saw that those that identified as Christians, they were generally more satisfied. They were generally more content, living richer, fuller lives. They're happier. Statistically, they had more kids too. Maybe that's just all on Donna. I don't know. I also read another article, and I think this was the second trigger for thinking about generosity, and generous Christians in particular. Because this was an article in the US, and it was about those who the group of Christians over there who were kind of classed as white evangelical Christians. And I'm not going to get political, but it is a large group of the church over there. And this article was saying now 80% of them vote for Donald Trump and Republicans, and they're often also usually the most vocal supporters of some of the more controversial policies that look really to make people suffer and to keep people down. They'll be against things like universal health care. They're certainly all for rounding people up and just sending them back where they came from, that kind of attitude. Benefits for people, no, they want to cut all that. You shouldn't have kids if you can't afford them. You should just go out and get a job. Where is the generosity there? Where is the love? If you think of non-Christians looking at that group of people, and that's kind of part of the church, which is a large part of the church in the US, these white evangelicals, are they looking at that group of people thinking, that's something I want to be a part of? That's really attracting me in. I want to be part of that. Well, no, not at all. And I don't blame them. It doesn't attract me either. A couple of readings this morning. Excuse me. Firstly, Proverbs chapter 11, 24 and 25. Give freely and become more wealthy. Be stingy and lose everything. The generous will prosper, Those who refresh others will themselves be refreshed. And then the main passage is 1 Kings 17, starting at verse 7. But after a while the brook dried up, for there was no rainfall anywhere in the land. Then the Lord said to Elijah, "Go and live in the village of Zarephath, near the city of Sidon. I have instructed a widow there to feed you." So he went to Zarephath. As he arrived at the gates of the village, he saw a widow gathering sticks, and he asked her, "Would you please bring me a little water in a cup?" As she was going to get it, he called to her, "Bring me a bite of bread too." But she said, "I swear by the Lord your God that I don't have a single piece of bread in the house, and I have only a handful of flour left in the jar and a little cooking oil in the bottom of the jug. I was just gathering a few sticks to cook this last meal, and then my son and I will die." But Elijah said to her, "Don't be afraid. Go ahead and do just what you've said, but make a little bread for me first. Then use what's left to prepare a meal for yourself and your son. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. There will always be flour and olive oil left in your containers until the time when the Lord sends rain and the crops grow again." So she did as Elijah said, and she and Elijah and her family continued to eat for many days. There was always enough flour and olive oil left in the containers, just as the Lord had promised through Elijah. Now there's 3 things I think happening in the story. And I will say story. It's an easy word to use, isn't it? When I guess sometimes if we just think of them as stories, we forget that these things really happened. And I imagine it never for 1 second entered that widow's mind that we'd be here 2,500 years later talking about her act of generosity. Because she simply gave all that she had. For her, it was life and death, literally life and death. It was literally all she had left. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't think there's been a single day in my life when I've had nothing. If I think back to being a kid, young child, we certainly weren't well off. Not sure if we were ever well off, really, but we didn't realise that as kids. We had everything we needed. We didn't always have everything we wanted, but we had everything we needed. I don't recall ever having to worry about where my next meal would come from. Always makes me laugh at home because we do our main food shop on a Saturday morning. I say we do a shop, it comes to the door, they bring it to us. But I was going to say by Thursday or Friday, but probably by about Monday afternoon, Ruby, like all sort of teenage or almost teenage kids, moaning there's nothing to eat. The fridge is bare, there's no food in the house. What she really means is there's nothing she fancies. She's eating all the nice things that she can just grab and eat. Well, the reality is the cupboards are full of food. I'm not going to promise it's all in date. I'm sure there's a tin of oxtail soup right at the back there from 2012 or something. But if she really needed to eat, there is food aplenty. But not for the widow here. She literally had almost nothing. Enough for one last small meal for her and her son, knowing that then they would die because they had nothing left. But she gave it all, and God used what she had. He used that little she had, because God can do great things with just very little. Never underestimate what God can do. Don't ever feel like you've got nothing to offer, or that what you've got to offer is just small and insignificant to be of use to God. She gave all she had, and God used what she had. And she received back more than she ever had to start with. Just through, in that moment, choosing to be generous and to trust God. So what does becoming generous mean? How do we become more generous? I think, first off, we need to have a change of heart. Matthew 6:21, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So you've got to ask yourself, what's your treasure? What is it? What do you treasure most in life? Where is it and what is it? And I imagine, a bit like in that survey, the answer for Christians would, or at least should, be very different to the answer for non-Christians. Not sure it always is, though. I did read another story, and this one I managed to find, and it was actually from a few years ago. It was about the boss of a tech company in the US. And he had a change of heart. And he realised that he wasn't comfortable with the way he was running his company, and he decided to change the pay structure so that everyone in the company was paid a minimum of at least $70,000. So that was the minimum wage for anyone, whether you were the cleaner, the receptionist, security, didn't matter what your job role was, you would be paid at least 70,000. Some would get more, but as a minimum 70,000. And essentially this meant a lot of the workforce got a pay rise, and often a big pay rise. And to fund it, he himself took a massive pay cut. He even mortgaged some properties to kind of make that change. And it all started with a change of heart. So he'd been living in luxury. He was earning way more money than he needed. And he'd seen some of the other kind of big tech entrepreneurs and what they were earning, and he was always chasing that big buck. There was a desire to compete with them and to earn as much, and to, I guess, for bragging rights. But then he saw people in his own company struggling to pay their rent, struggling to keep a roof over their head, taking second jobs just to pay for food. And he had a change of heart. Or you could say he had a change of treasure. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So likewise, if we're going to become more generous, we need a change of heart. And then I think that naturally leads to a change of attitude. Because when your heart is focused on the things of God, then your attitude begins to change. In Philippians 3 verse 8, we read, "Everything else is worthless compared to the infinite value of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord. I count it all as garbage so I could gain Christ." We can be very focused on the things that we have, the things that we do, our houses, our cars, our gadgets, our hobbies. And I'm sure, even though we might often feel like we don't have a lot, I'm sure we've all really got more than we need. Think about going on holiday in the past. You go on holiday to these exotic places, and you go on a day trip, and you see people who really have nothing, and you realise how much you kind of really have. I'm not saying it's a bad thing to have things, unless you feel compelled by God at any point to give everything away, like in the story of the rich young ruler. Then it's fine to have things and fine to enjoy them. We just need to keep in mind at the end of the day that all these things are worthless. And if ever any of those things becomes more important to you than Jesus, you've got to seriously consider if you should continue to have that thing in your life. You need a change of attitude so that you start to treasure the things that before you have a relationship with Jesus you would never considered treasuring. Before Jesus became the priority of your life, things are different, but then you have a change of heart and a change of attitude. And with the change of heart and with the change of attitude, there comes a point where you have to make a decision. You've got a change of heart, you've given it to Jesus. You've got a change of attitude about what's important in your life and about where your treasure is and the people in your life and your possessions. And then you come to a decision, and what does that mean then? What do I do now? What are you going to do if Jesus comes and calls you to do something? In Timothy we read, "Command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. In this way they will lay up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age, so that they may take hold of the life that is truly life." I mean, how much time do we spend thinking about and planning for retirement in our lives? Whether it's paying into pensions, saving, making plans. A couple of weeks ago, there was a guy at work, it was his birthday, and he was celebrating the fact that he was now into a single figure number of years until retirement. And this, it was like, now the countdown was in single figures. He was very excited about this. Now, for some of it might feel nearer, might be nearer, and for others much further away. It feels a lot further away than that for me. But I guess it's still true to say that. I kind of keep an eye on my pension. The annual statements come round and you look at it and you think, wow, it's worth less than it was last year. Brilliant. And I'm not saying it's wrong to plan for retirement. Not wrong to, plan for your future. Of course not. But we know Jesus is coming back. He could be here literally in a moment. And even if he doesn't come back in any of our lifetimes, however long a retirement we have pales into insignificance to what comes next, what will come after, the eternity we'll have in heaven. So maybe, instead of just thinking of planning for retirement, we should spend at least as much time planning for what comes next, for taking a hold of the life that is truly life, a life that starts right now. We can lay up some treasure, get some treasure where it's really going to matter. As I said, that involves making a decision. Am I letting anything that I own me? Am I letting anything that I have me? Am I letting anything that I do be about me? Or am I willing to be just generous with anything that God calls me to be or calls me to do? So a change of heart leads to a change of attitude, leads to a decision. Because I have Jesus in my life, I'm going to do things differently. I'm going to do what Jesus tells me to do, whatever Jesus tells me to do. Which leads me to lastly, you have to take action. If you come to a decision that things have to change, that our priorities have been wrong in our life, it's been about me rather than about Jesus, then it's time now to take action. It's like in Acts chapter 4, verse 36 and 37. We read about Joseph. For instance, it says there was Joseph, the one the apostles nicknamed Barnabas, which means son of encouragement. He sold a field he owned and brought the money to the apostles. I don't own a field. I'm guessing maybe no one here owns a field, maybe you do. But it's not about the field. It's about Barnabas doing what he could, offering up what he had for God to use. We might not have fields, but we can offer up what we have. We can offer up ourselves to serve, using the gifts that God has given us, doing our parts in being what He's called us to be. Using our gifts, sharing our time, being available to people, doing something that really matters to people, laying up treasure for the future. God calls us to be generous. Generous with whatever we've got. Generous with our money. Generous with our time. Generous with our abilities. With the strength and the gifts that God has given us. To use them for God's purpose and glory. Let's be generous with all those things. Be generous with kindness. Be generous with forgiveness. Be generous with patience. Not much will happen in any church or in our individual lives until we understand that whatever we have, possessions or otherwise, God wants us to focus on what really matters, Jesus. Because everything else is worthless. Everything else is just garbage by comparison. Let's close in prayer. Father, we just thank you for this time we've been able to come together this morning to share in a time of worship and fellowship and to just focus our hearts and our minds on the things from above, Lord. And we just pray now that as we go from here, we don't lose that focus, that we keep our eyes firmly fixed on the one who matters, that our treasure will be where our heart is with you, Lord. Pray that we can go out into the world and be an influence on that world, that they can see what the church has to offer for them, not just what the church is wanting from them. That people will see through your people, or the love and kindness and generosity that you have to offer everyone who follows you, Lord. Amen.